She nodded, barely breathing, and Bryan McDonald kissed Doris Sanders in front of 500 people, a dozen cameras, and the crumbling ruins of his carefully constructed life. The flash of cameras exploded like fireworks across the grand ballroom as Bryan McDonald walked past the 5 women standing in designer gowns, their smiles freezing mid-pose. The charity gala had reached its peak, champagne flowed, diamonds glittered under chandeliers, and New York's elite watched the billionaire real estate mogul with hungry curiosity. Everyone knew what was supposed to happen tonight. Bryan was meant to choose 5 perfect candidates. 5 flawless images. 5 carefully curated futures. But Bryan's eyes found only one person in that sea of wealth and expectation. Doris Sanders sat near the unveiled mural she had painted, her wheelchair positioned beside the massive canvas titled Unbroken. The artwork depicted a phoenix rising from shattered glass, wings spread wide in defiant beauty. She hadn't expected to stay for the gala itself, just long enough to see her work revealed. Now she watched Bryan approaching with an expression that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "Bryan, don't," she whispered when he reached her, but her voice was drowned by the murmuring crowd. He knelt beside her wheelchair, his hand finding hers. "I'm tired of living for everyone else. You'll regret this tomorrow. Your board, your investors, your family. The only thing I'd regret is walking away from you again." His voice carried across the silent room now, every word a grenade lobbed into polite society. "Doris Sanders, you're the bravest person I've ever met. You taught me that real strength isn't about conquering markets or building empires. It's about being honest enough to show the world who you really are." Doris felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Bryan, I can't be what they expect. Look at me. I'm not. You're everything." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles, then leaned forward. "May I?" She nodded, barely breathing, and Bryan McDonald kissed Doris Sanders in front of 500 people, a dozen cameras, and the crumbling ruins of his carefully constructed life. The room erupted. Some gasped. Others pulled out phones. A woman in a silver gown actually shrieked. Bryan didn't care. He poured everything into that kiss, every stolen conversation in her studio, every laugh they'd shared over paint-stained coffee cups, every moment he'd spent pretending she didn't matter when she was all that mattered. When they finally broke apart, Doris was crying. "You beautiful, stupid man. You have no idea what you just did." "I know exactly what I did." Bryan stood, facing the crowd with Doris's hand still clasped in his. "I chose love over image. And I'd do it again." His mother, Patricia McDonald, stood near the stage, her face pale with fury. His business partner, Marcus Chen, was already on his phone. The 5 women who'd been competing for his affection had vanished toward the exits. And the photographers, God, the photographers were having the night of their lives. Doris squeezed his hand. "Take me home, Bryan. Before this gets worse." But it was already too late for that. By dawn, the headline screamed across every major publication. "Billionaire's shocking choice, McDonald kisses disabled artist at gala." From penthouse to charity case, Bryan McDonald's controversial romance. 5 perfect women spurned for wheelchair-bound painter. The photos were everywhere, Bryan kneeling, Bryan kissing, Bryan holding Doris's hand like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to earth. The comment sections were vicious. Some praised his courage. Many questioned his sanity. Others speculated about guilt, publicity stunts, or worse, fetishization. The racist and ableist remarks cut deepest, each one a knife twisted in Doris's gut as she scrolled through her phone at 3 a.m., unable to sleep. Pity project. Virtue signaling. He'll get bored once the novelty wears off. What does he see in her besides a headline? Doris set her phone down and stared at the ceiling of her small Brooklyn apartment. The kiss had felt real. Bryan's words had felt real. But maybe she'd been foolish to believe a billionaire could actually want her for her, not for the story she represented. Her phone buzzed. "Bryan. Are you awake?" "Unfortunately. I'm outside."
Can I come up?
She almost said no. Almost told him to go back to his penthouse, his board meetings, his perfect life. Instead, she buzzed him in. Bryan looked terrible when he entered her apartment. His hair was disheveled, his tie gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He carried 2 cups of coffee and a stack of newspapers he immediately tossed in her trash. "Don't read them," he said, setting the coffee on her small kitchen table. "Any of them." Too late. Doris wheeled herself closer. "Bryan, this is insane. Your investors are pulling out. Your mother called me a distraction. Marcus says the board wants you gone. Let them." Bryan slumped onto her worn couch, looking more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. "I built McDonald Properties from nothing, Doris. 20 years of 90-hour weeks, of sacrificing everything for the next deal, the next acquisition, the next tower with my name on it. And for what? So I could date women I didn't love because they looked good on magazine covers? So I could smile for cameras and pretend I gave a damn about charity galas beyond the tax write-offs. You care about your work," Doris said quietly. "I've seen you light up talking about urban development, about creating spaces for communities. I cared about winning." Bryan ran his hands through his hair. "That's all it ever was. Winning. Beating my competitors. Proving I could build higher, earn more, be more. And then I met you." Doris's breath caught. "Bryan, you were painting that mural, remember? I walked into the warehouse, and you were covered in paint, arguing with your assistant about whether the phoenix's wings needed more gold or more crimson. You were so focused, so passionate, so completely yourself. And when you noticed me, you didn't simper or flirt or try to impress me. You asked if I was the guy funding the art initiative, and when I said yes, you told me my foundation's mission statement was generic corporate bullshit." Despite everything, Doris smiled. "I probably could have phrased that better. It was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in years." Bryan moved to kneel beside her wheelchair again, his eyes searching hers. "You challenged me. Made me think about what I was building and why. Made me realize I'd spent 2 decades constructing a perfect image while letting my actual self wither away. So I'm what? Your midlife crisis? Your redemption arc?" The words came out harsher than Doris intended, but she was scared of believing this, scared of being hurt, scared of becoming nothing more than a tabloid headline in 6 months when Bryan realized the cost was too high. "You're the woman I love," Bryan said simply. "And yes, I know it's fast. I know it sounds crazy. But Doris, I've never felt this way about anyone. Never wanted to know everything about someone, their favorite color, their worst fear, what they dream about at 3 in the morning. Never wanted to build something real instead of just impressive." Doris closed her eyes. "They're destroying you because of me. They're revealing who they really are because I chose you." Bryan took her hands. "I don't care about the headlines. I don't care about investors who only valued me for my image. I care about waking up and knowing I'm living authentically. I care about you. Your mother hates me. My mother hates anything she can't control. Your company is falling apart. Then I'll build something better." "Bryan," Doris opened her eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm scared. I'm scared of believing this is real and then watching you walk away when the price gets too high. I'm scared of being the reason you lose everything you worked for. I'm scared of being reduced to the disabled black girl who ruined Bryan McDonald." Bryan pulled her close, and Doris let herself cry into his shoulder, great, heaving sobs that she'd been holding back since the kiss, since the headlines, since the moment she realized falling for Bryan McDonald might be the most beautiful and terrible thing she'd ever done. "Listen to me," Bryan murmured into her hair. "You didn't ruin anything. You saved me. And I know I'm asking you to trust me when the whole world is screaming reasons why you shouldn't. But Doris, I'm not going anywhere. Not when things get hard. Not when the next scandal breaks. Not ever." They stayed like that for a long time, coffee growing cold on the table, dawn light creeping through the windows. Finally, Doris pulled back and wiped her eyes. What happens now? Bryan smiled, the real smile she'd first seen in her studio, not the practiced one from magazine covers. Now we face it together. Starting with breakfast, because I'm starving and your coffee is terrible. My coffee is perfect, you're just spoiled by your fancy espresso machine. See, this is why I love you. No one else dares insult my coffee. They ordered bagels from the deli down the street, and for a few hours, the world outside stopped mattering quite so much. But the storm was far from over. That Monday, Bryan attended the emergency board meeting at McDonald Properties. Marcus stood at the head of the conference table, looking apologetic but determined. The other board members wore expressions ranging from disappointment to barely concealed rage. Bryan, we need to discuss Saturday night, Marcus began carefully. The press coverage has been extensive, Patricia McDonald cut in sharply. She sat at the far end of the table, every inch the ruthless businesswoman who'd helped build the company alongside her son. And damaging. We've lost 3 major investors. The Kensington project is in jeopardy. And our competitors are circling like sharks. Because I kissed someone. Bryan kept his voice level, though anger simmered beneath. Because I chose to be honest about my feelings. Because you made a spectacle, his mother snapped. Because you threw away 5 perfectly suitable women from good families, women who could have strengthened our position, for a girl in a wheelchair you barely know. Her name is Doris Sanders, Bryan said coldly. She's an incredibly talented artist. And I've spent more quality time with her in 3 months than I spent with any of those suitable women in 3 years. Marcus cleared his throat. Bryan, no one is questioning your right to date whoever you want. But the timing, the public nature of it, the optics. The optics of what, Marcus? A white billionaire dating a black disabled woman? Is that what's really bothering everyone here? The silence was damning. Patricia stood, her voice ice. Don't make this about race or disability. This is about judgment. You are the face of this company. Your image directly impacts our valuation, our partnerships, our credibility. That stunt on Saturday suggested you're having some kind of crisis, and investors don't trust instability. Then maybe I don't belong here anymore. Bryan's words dropped like bombs. Maybe it's time I step back. Bryan, don't be rash, Marcus said quickly. We can manage this. A carefully worded statement, some strategic appearances, focus back on business. I'm not issuing a statement about my personal life, Bryan interrupted. And I'm not apologizing for falling in love. So here's what's going to happen. I'm taking a leave of absence from day-to-day operations. Marcus, you'll serve as acting CEO. Mother, you'll maintain your board position. And I'll be starting a new venture, a non-profit art foundation supporting disabled and minority artists. Patricia's face went white. You're walking away? After everything we built? I'm walking toward something that actually matters. Bryan stood, gathering his briefcase. And for the record, Doris didn't ask me to do any of this. This is my choice. My decision. The first completely honest decision I've made in 20 years. He left the conference room to stunned silence, his heart pounding but his mind clear. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, like jumping off a cliff and discovering he could fly. Doris was waiting outside the building, her wheelchair parked near a small fountain. Bryan had texted her before the meeting, needing to see her face afterward regardless of how things went. She looked up as he approached, anxiety written in every line of her body. Well, she asked. I quit. You what? Took a leave of absence, technically. But yeah, I'm done with McDonald Properties. I'm going to start that foundation I told you about. Bryan sat on the fountain's edge beside her. The board thinks I'm insane. My mother thinks I'm throwing away my legacy. And honestly? I've never felt better. Doris stared at him. Bryan, you can't just walk away from your life's work because of me. I'm not walking away from anything except a life that was slowly suffocating me. He took her hand. Doris, I know this is scary. I know the timing is fast and the circumstances are messy. But I meant what I said. You didn't ruin me. You woke me up. And now I want to build something real, something that actually helps people instead of just making me richer. A foundation? Doris's voice was cautious, but Bryan could see hope flickering in her eyes. For artists like you. People with incredible talent who get overlooked because they don't fit conventional molds. Disabled artists, minority artists, anyone whose voice deserves amplification but keeps getting drowned out by systemic barriers. Bryan's excitement grew as he talked. I have the resources, the connections, the infrastructure. And you have the vision, the authenticity, the understanding of what these artists actually need. We could do this together, Doris. If you want to. She was quiet for a long moment, and Bryan's heart sank. He'd pushed too hard, asked too much, assumed. Yes, Doris said softly. Yes, I want to. Yeah? Yeah. She smiled, and it was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. But Bryan, I need you to understand something. This can't be about you saving me or proving something to the world. If we do this, we're partners. Equal partners. I'm not your inspiration porn or your redemption project. I know that. Do you? Doris's gaze was fierce. Because the world is going to try to frame me that way. Poor crippled black girl rescued by wealthy white savior. And I refuse to be reduced to that narrative. I have my own strength, my own voice, my own value that exists completely independent of you. Bryan felt something in his chest crack open, a new understanding, a deeper respect. You're right. And I'm sorry if I made it sound like I was swooping in to save you. The truth is, you saved me, Doris. You showed me what real courage looks like. What authentic living looks like. I don't want to rescue you. I want to build something alongside you. As equals. Okay then. Doris squeezed his hand. Partners. Partners. They sealed it with a kiss, softer than the one at the gala but somehow more meaningful. This wasn't for cameras or audiences. This was for them. The next 3 months were chaos. Bryan hired lawyers to structure the foundation. Doris recruited artists and developed programming. They worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and shared vision. The press coverage gradually shifted from scandal to curiosity to grudging respect as the foundation's mission became clear. But the personal attacks continued. Anonymous trolls sent Doris hateful messages. Conservative pundits questioned Bryan's mental state. Some disability advocates accused them of exploitation while others celebrated their visibility. The foundation received both generous donations and venomous hate mail. Through it all, Bryan and Doris grew closer. They learned each other's quirks, Bryan's obsessive organization, Doris's habit of painting at 2 a.m. when inspiration struck. They had their first real fight over foundation branding. Bryan wanted sleek corporate, Doris wanted raw artistic. They made up over Thai food and a shared understanding that disagreement didn't mean disaster. Bryan learned about Doris's accident, a drunk driver 3 years ago that killed her younger brother and left her paralyzed from the waist down. He held her while she cried about survivor's guilt, about the dreams she'd had to reshape, about the daily struggle with a body that no longer obeyed her commands. Doris learned about Bryan's father, a construction worker who died in a worksite accident when Bryan was 12, leaving his mother to raise him alone and drill into him that success meant never being vulnerable, never showing weakness, never trusting anyone who might take advantage. "We're both just scared kids pretending to be adults," Doris said one night, lying beside Bryan on the floor of the foundation's empty office space, staring up at exposed pipes and possibilities. "Speak for yourself." "I'm very mature," Bryan deadened. She laughed and swatted his arm. "You ate pizza for breakfast 3 days in a row. That's called efficient meal planning. That's called being a disaster." "Your disaster, though." "Yeah," Doris said softly. "Mine." The foundation launched on a crisp October evening, 6 months after the kiss that changed everything. They transformed an old warehouse in Brooklyn into a gallery and studio space, complete with accessibility features and state-of-the-art equipment. 50 artists showcased their work: painters, sculptors, musicians, performers, each one carrying a story of barriers overcome and voices reclaimed. Doris's new mural dominated one wall, a companion piece to Unbroken, titled Becoming. It depicted multiple figures rising together, different bodies and abilities and backgrounds, all reaching toward light. Bryan stood beside her as guests filtered in, his arm around her shoulders. "You did this," he murmured. "This vision, this space, it's all you." "We did this," Doris corrected. "Together." Patricia McDonald attended, her presence a surprise that made Bryan's throat tight. She studied the artwork with a critical eye, spoke briefly to several artists, then approached Bryan and Doris near the end of the night. "It's impressive," Patricia said stiffly. "What you've built here." "Thank you," Doris replied, her voice carefully neutral. Patricia turned to her son. "I was wrong. About many things. About what matters. About who matters." She paused, visibly struggling. "About her. I let fear guide me instead of trust. Fear of change, of loss, of losing control over the narrative we'd built. But watching you these past months, watching you become more yourself than I've seen in years, I realized I'd rather have an honest son than a perfect image." Bryan blinked back sudden tears. "Mom. Don't get sentimental," Patricia cut in, but her own eyes were suspiciously bright. "I'm still angry you walked away from the company. But I understand why you had to." She extended her hand to Doris. "I'm sorry for my initial reaction. You clearly make my son happy. And this foundation, it's good work. Important work." Doris shook her hand, gracious despite the months of coldness. "Thank you, Mrs. McDonald. That means a lot." After Patricia left, Doris exhaled shakily. "Did that just happen? I think my mother just gave us her blessing. I'm going to need another drink." Bryan laughed and pulled her close, grateful for her resilience, her humor, her ability to face difficulty with grace. They watched guests mingle, artists connect, possibilities multiply. The real turning point came 3 months later at the International Contemporary Art Awards in Amsterdam. Doris's Unbroken and Becoming murals had been photographed, documented, and nominated for the Emerging Artist Prize. Bryan accompanied her to the ceremony, watching from the audience as she wheeled onto the stage after her name was announced. Doris gripped the award, a glass sculpture that caught stage lights and threw rainbow patterns across her face. "I almost didn't paint Unbroken," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I was afraid. Afraid of being seen. Afraid of being reduced to my disability or my race or any single aspect of my identity rather than being recognized for my art." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. But someone challenged me to stop hiding. To stop playing small. To stop letting fear dictate what I created and how I shared it with the world. Doris's eyes found Bryan in the crowd. "That person taught me that real courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and choosing authenticity anyway." Bryan felt his chest constrict with love and pride. "This award represents more than recognition of my work," Doris continued. "It represents the possibility that we can all rise above the narratives assigned to us. That our worth isn't determined by our bodies or our circumstances but by our courage to be fully, messily, beautifully ourselves. To everyone who feels invisible or diminished or less than, you are unbroken. You are becoming. And your story matters." The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. People stood. And Bryan McDonald, billionaire turned non-profit founder, sat in the audience crying openly as the woman he loved claimed her space in the world. After the ceremony, they met in a quiet corridor away from the celebration. Doris was still clutching her award, her face flushed with excitement and disbelief. "That was incredible," Bryan said, pulling her into a kiss. "You were incredible. I couldn't have done it without you." "Yes, you could have. You were always this strong, this talented, this remarkable. I just got lucky enough to witness it. Bryan knelt beside her wheelchair, a familiar position now but one that never stopped feeling significant. Doris Sanders, you've changed my entire life. You've taught me about courage, authenticity, what really matters. And I know we said we'd take things slow, but I don't want to wait anymore. Doris's breath caught. Bryan, I love you. I love your strength and your art and your terrible coffee. I love how you challenge me and support me and refuse to let me hide behind money or image. I love the life we're building together. And I want to keep building it, officially, permanently, if you'll have me. He pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple silver band with a single diamond. Will you marry me? Doris stared at the ring, then at Bryan, then back at the ring. You're serious? Completely. We've only been together 9 months. I've known for 9 minutes that you were it for me. That's the cheesiest thing you've ever said. Is that a yes? Doris laughed, crying now too. Yes, you ridiculous man. Yes, I'll marry you. Bryan slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her again, this kiss different from all the others, a promise, a commitment, a choice made again and again to love openly despite cost or consequence. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the foundation, surrounded by artists and friends and family who'd come to accept their love story. Patricia walked Bryan down the aisle. Doris's mother cried through the entire ceremony. Marcus served as best man, having fully embraced his role at McDonald Properties while supporting Bryan's new path. The press covered it, of course. But the headlines had shifted, Art Foundation founders tie the knot. From gala scandal to happily ever after. Bryan McDonald and Doris Sanders prove love transcends image. Some commenters still questioned them. Some still spewed hatred. But increasingly, their story became one of inspiration, not because Bryan had saved Doris or because their love was tragic or noble, but because they'd both chosen authenticity over perfection, partnership over image, courage over comfort. 2 years after that first kiss, the foundation had expanded to 5 cities. They'd provided grants to over 300 artists. They'd launched mentorship programs, accessible studio spaces, and exhibition opportunities. Doris's work hung in galleries worldwide. Bryan discovered he was better at empowering creativity than building skyscrapers. And together, they proved that the most radical act in a world obsessed with image was simply choosing to be real. On their 2nd anniversary, they returned to the original warehouse where Doris had painted Unbroken. It was late evening, the space empty and echoing with memory. Do you ever regret it? Doris asked, studying the mural that had changed everything. Giving up McDonald Properties, your old life, everything you worked for. Bryan wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Not for a second. I didn't lose anything that mattered, Doris. I found everything that does. She leaned back against him, the two of them reflected in the mural's shattered glass turned radiant wings. I love you, Bryan McDonald. I love you, Doris McDonald. They stayed like that for a long time, two people who'd chosen each other over expectation, who'd built something real from the rubble of image, who'd discovered that the truest success was living honestly, no matter how terrifying that honesty might be. The world would keep spinning. Headlines would keep coming. Challenges would keep arising. But they'd face it all together, partners in every sense, unbroken and becoming, again and again. If this story moved you, reminded you that authentic love is worth fighting for, or inspired you to choose courage over comfort, please subscribe to see more stories that challenge us to live fully and love boldly. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts on Bryan and Doris's journey, and like this video to help spread their message. Real strength isn't about perfection, it's about being brave enough to be yourself. Your story matters too. Never forget that.